Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the historical side of Assassin's Creed versus the gameplay side. The idea of this episode is just to basically talk about how Assassin's Creed has to mirror historical fantasy and gameplay to create a game that's both educational and fun, but also has a gameplay mechanic that will help people come back and replay it. Now, I'm not good at history, so I need a historian, and I did ask Indiana Jones, but he was off somewhere. So I have got the next best thing. I have Louise from the Rookery's Archive.
You call that poster Lara Croft?
I forgot about Lara Croft. I knew there's on my list we had Indiana Jones.
It's canon now. It's canon now. I'm better than Lara. Sorry.
Yes, see, better than Lara, because
Yes.
the list people went Indiana Jones, Louise, then Tomb Raider, then Nathan Drake, and we got Louise. If we didn't get Louise, I would have to hunt for Nathan Drake or Tomb Raider, so we got you.
Honestly, you've got the best out of the bunch.
Oh. and this is slightly off topic. How have you been? Do you know how to do some combat or whip or something? I don't know.
Well, I am on the archery team at my university.
That's terrifying.
And I do own a replica of Andor from Lord of the Rings, so I am prepared for the zombie apocalypse if and when it happens.
I think you are slightly better than both of them. Right, so are you excited for this one?
I am so excited. So, you said you were looking for a historian. You've got an archaeologist who's my dissertation is on history and in video games and stuff, and specifically Assassin's Creed.
You know, if someone told me a few years ago I could blag my way into university to do a degree on history in a video game, I would have passed it. Instead, I went to be a vet. Time wasted.
To be fair, you get to hang around with animals every day, so being a vet isn't that bad.
Have you seen a meerkat? Them things are evil.
Okay, fair point. I've watched Madagascar. I know how evil they get.
True story. I've had a meerkat locked in a bird feeder, like a big bin fed bird feed, for 2 hours because it was trying to catch a pigeon.
I mean, meerkat, pigeon, lesser of two evils, really.
The pigeon was our pet.
Oh.
Well, this is one way to start the show. Let's rewind. So, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Before we quick kick off, I do want to say congratulations, Mentors Guild.
Yeah, we did it, guys.
I just really went to put a shameless plug in there, but enough plugging. We'll get in trouble.
But this is the first episode I think we're both recording for either this and the Rookery's Archives since we became mentors. That's amazing. It's monumental.
It's the Mentors United.
Yeah. It sounds like a football team.
This is how my episodes are apparently going to start starting now. Oh. So
Mentors United versus Templars. Templar City? No? Okay. Tangent, stop.
Right, okay, so we all tuned in to hear history versus gameplay, and we may have gone off on a 4-minute tangent, but hey, it's all good. So, let's start looking at some historical inaccuracies in Assassin's Creed that are needed because of gameplay mechanics.
Yeah. So, the rule of cool applies. It's video games.
Yes.
There's always going to be some bending of reality and historical things for the sake of things like aesthetic and for, making it more accessible and easier for a gameplay perspective. Because not everything from history is going to translate well to an in-game mechanic or something fun or something that's going to be very frustrating on a gameplay level that actually happened or was an actual social ideal of the time.
And I agree, and I think Assassin's Creed does set itself out there as a blend of history and fantasy really well. And when you do play the game, you do expect a high level of historical accuracy, but as we'll discuss closer in the show, if the game was too historically accurate, it would kind of be boring.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So I think the main thing, especially now in the last couple of years when things have like exploded with like historical costuming online, there's for example, just look at how people responded to Bridgerton. Um, you have people wanting a higher historical accuracy in video games. When you look back at what Assassin's Creed has done, they've been very good with their historical accuracy, particularly in the last three. So Origins onwards, they've had historians on teams. They've done the discovery tours where they've gone into and dissected and explained like key points in society and gods and stuff to show how it would happen. They've had, you know, real evidence used to world build these games. And I think I'm trying to think about. I think it was in the first Assassin's Creed game. They changed something from the trailer in the main game. I think it was the crossbow on Altair's back in the release trailer, because it isn't historically accurate for the Crusades.
and
Like it wasn't invented at that point, so they changed it to make it more historically accurate.
and that actually does bring up the first point I was going to discuss, because it's reading my mind. The crossbow is a perfect example of Assassin's Creed trying to outweigh gameplay with history, because gameplay wise, a crossbow in Assassin's Creed 1 would have been perfect. It would have worked. It would have been a lot of fun, you know, on the rooftops shooting the crossbow. But historically accuracy wise, it just didn't fit. So taking it out made the game a bit more grounded in history and more enjoyable, but at the cost of a new gameplay mechanic that might have worked.
And then, yeah, and then on the flip side of making it more or less historically accurate, in Florentine, like the Renaissance period in Florence, Venice, and stuff like that, fashion was very bright, vibrant colours. So with Ezio and Giovanni and all the assassins going around in like white and black, they would not fit in at all. They would stick out more than they blend in. But just think how bizarre it'd be watching Ezio run around in like bright green and yellow.
It would have been weird, but
Quite hilarious. At the point, it wouldn't. I don't think gameplay, from a gamer standpoint, you wouldn't take it as seriously as it would be like the the very recognizable hooded cloak, and in white and red and black.
I think the other thing that screams major historical inaccuracy in Assassin's Creed 2, and it's not a bad thing, I really enjoy it and it is a really good gameplay loop, is technically it's the wrist gun on Ezio. Because
Yeah,
due to common science and physics, the pressure that it would have put out wouldn't have been able to withstand by his wrist. It would have probably broke his wrist. And how small the mechanism would be, it probably wouldn't have as much firepower as the longer style guns I had in them times. But you're not going to complain because it's a fun gameplay mechanic.
yeah. Just don't think too hardly about the like powder burns he's going to have on his wrist for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
He'll be fine.
And I think at that point, you would say, well, is it bad that they did that? Well, no, because
It's fun. Rule of cool applies.
yeah, and it's cool, it's fun, and theoretically, it kind of fits in with the aesthetic because it wasn't just a big, over glaring wrist gun, use it all the time.
Yeah. And the E3 trailer where like it was the end of, you know, Carnival, and he used it in that like dramatic moment to promote the game. Everyone loved that. You can't deny how fun that was. Like seeing that for the first time as our introduction to Ezio.
I enjoyed it, but now that I've played Unity, I wish it was a crossbow.
Oh, the Phantom Blade was so good.
Yeah.
It's impractical, but I love the aesthetic of it.
See,
I just don't think that. Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. Actually, you could have swapped the Phantom Blade and the wrist gun, with Ezio and Arno the other way around. So Ezio has the Phantom Blade because people are still using crossbows and actual bows in this point. And it would make more sense, but it wouldn't be as fun.
And that's what it boils down to. Assassin's Creed has to be history at heart. It's what it's pledged as, and it's done a fantastic job. And I do agree with in these new games, history's done a bit better because, slight tangent, but a fact I learned is a lot of statues from the Greek era weren't just plain white marble. They were
No, they were coloured. They were very vibrantly coloured.
But I didn't know that until Assassin's Creed, which is a big whoa. Because you see,
It's a big learning point for people as well, because now they've added in things like the discovery tours and put in this focus of we're going to make it a bit historically accurate. Okay, so Origins and Odyssey didn't have the database like we had in earlier games. They're showing how making it more historically accurate so we can learn the information as a visual narrative instead. So while we could like talk with Katarina Sforza and read the database entry with Sean's sarcasm aside, now we can see it as a thing. So instead of saying, oh, this is that person and this is the world they live in, this is the world they live in. Look how different it is. Look how it, like, our perceptions of it has changed. Like, because there's always going to be some element of things coming out of canon, like canon world building and kind of fiction from particularly like the 18th and 19th centuries. It's like Viking horned helmets. They did not exist. It was a myth and an aesthetic choice by an opera company that we then assumed would be real. Same with pirates saying "arr." It's something that was added in for film in like the golden age of cinema and like the early talkies and early colour films. They didn't do that. We know they don't do that.
could you imagine that Edward just sailing around, just going, "Arr, I be a Templar, arr."
Avast ye.
Avast ye my hearties, my hidden blade, arr.
In a very thick Welsh accent.
So it's clear to see that Assassin's Creed is doing a grand job with historical accuracy, but you also do need that gameplay loop to be more enjoyable. And I have talked in the past about discovery mode being really fun, and I do agree with you. If the games then focus on, um, let's say about 90% grounded history, but 10% over the top extra gameplay, just make it fun, because we all know the abilities and skills in Valhalla would not have worked historically.
Yeah, like if you see somebody do a leap of faith, they are not surviving it if they land in the cave. Like when you think back to 2016 and the release of the Assassin's Creed movie, the world's highest freefall jump was undertaken for that film. I've watched the behind the scenes footage, and I actually got to go to the fan screening of the film, so we got to watch some of like the big live jump they recreated on live television in this cinema where we all were. But the point is, the size of the airbag and the impact zone they had was astronomically bigger than it was for like a hay bale. You fall in a hay bale, you're getting a concussion at best. You are not walking away from that, my dude.
So maybe Assassin's Creed 1 was correct because it did give a nod to when you face the Templars at the gate and the Grand Master was like, "We'll show you
The failed, yeah, and yeah,
how we do fear," and the first person breaks his leg doing the leap of
yeah,
faith. So
he botches it. Yeah,
they were kind of nodding like, it's not historic accuracy. Look, this guy's broke his legs, but we need a gameplay loop that's going to be enjoyable, so we'll keep doing it. And like you said, discovery mode is the perfect way for them to say, let's give 100% historical accuracy, but in our game, we can take the liberty of gameplay because you're going to get that 100% historical accuracy later on in the Discovery Tour.
yeah. And going back to what I said about aesthetic choice, because you mentioned the Discovery Tour, I thought back. because I always used to do Discovery Tours Cleopatra for some reason. But thinking about Cleopatra's outfit, it's not historically accurate to what it would have been during Ptolemaic Egypt. It brings more to mind some of the big films of the 1950s, where that was I can't remember. It's really annoying. I think it's just Antony and Cleopatra, the film. Hold on. Please cut this out. I'll restart. Can you cut this bit out while I quickly Google it?
No, we shall not cut this out with Google.
Oh.
We do it all one take here, people.
Great, highest cost Cleopatra film. So essentially, Cleopatra, the 1963 film, with Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. That's sort of like the aesthetic choice it is picking for her outfit rather than historical accuracy, because it's so recognizable.
And you've got to have that creative flair, because history is, in one term, can be very linear and slightly boring, not to sound thing, but a lot of the stuff that you would learn in a game or in a movie or TV can make that bit in history that bit more on the edge of your seat. Someone in history may have been known to wear just plain white, but you just put them in a game and give them more vibrant colours. It gives the character.
Or the reverse, yeah. It's also it's also seen them like a battlefield tactic. Thinking back to 300, and the very first the opening scenes of Odyssey, where we see that battle of Thermopylae and Leonidas. They are not Spartan military tactics, my friend. That is just pure, let's do some wish fulfillment. Play as Leonidas, kick ass. Who cares if you're being historically Spartan or not?
It was still badass, though. It was a big scientific moment. But I do give Odyssey a bit more leeway, because unlike the other games, they do have the crutch to fall back on. Is Spear of Leonidas is a piece of Eden. So
and also like a lot of that period, it's like the earliest game we've ever covered, and quite a lot of the stuff we have from that period. We have historical pieces of writing, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like the Iliad in particular was about the siege of Troy, and like that series of books of which we only have those two surviving. The siege of Troy was an actual event, but there are like historical and mythological elements that have been woven in there to make it fun, to make it memorable. And I think adding those in, because the last couple of games have been adding in more mythology, and I really enjoy that, just purely because I am someone who enjoys mythology. And I mentioned the last time I was a guest on yours, like I was able to figure out plot twists because I knew the mythology in Valhalla, and it was like that actually made it more enjoyable for me, because I loved going around and being able to point out elements of, oh, it's that thing, oh, he's that person's son, wait, is it referencing that specific myth? They're a games company at the end of the day. They're selling you an experience. They're not selling you like go back in history. Not entirely, anyway. It's a sci-fi series, technically, alternate history.
I think the biggest case in point for that, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate because I know it's one of your favourite games, so help me, people, will be Syndicate. Because Syndicate is, I would say, next to Unity, one of the biggest, as in not as in map size, but as in height of buildings. There's Ben to Ben, which is a 1-to-1 scale. The way things are, if they didn't use a gameplay mechanic to create new ways to get around for traversal, like the Wristblade, the zipline launcher, which someone did make on YouTube, but it's triple the size, because back then it would have been impossible to make something that small. And withstanding all that weight on your wrist, the Romans invented the Roman handshake, which you grab each other's wrists when you're picking somebody up because it supports the weight evenly.
It's still one of the strongest ways to pick a person up, like from standing, and like from like pulling them up from to a different ledge and stuff, it's still one of the strongest ways of like contact, human to human contact.
So essentially, with the blade, with how the blade is mounted on a wrist, Jacob Fire and Eve Fire using it as a zipline would have been impossible. The way how fast it goes, it would have pulled their arm out of socket or broken the wrist. But take that out of
Time would have snapped.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
like if you think about the dimensions of the line, they probably wouldn't have had like all the mechanics and stuff we use for going like mountain climbing now. Like you can get some very strong things like ropes and stuff used for rock climbing that are basically the same, that are like less than a centimeter in diameter, but they will hold body weight if you have enough of them. That rope launcher, no, that is snapping.
but take that out of Syndicate and essentially to climb Big Ben using conventional Assassin's Creed parkour, I think would have just
It takes forever.
I wouldn't have bothered, not to sound thing. I would not have bothered of going around the whole buildings of London without it. So essentially, you need some gameplay mechanics to make historical worlds a bit more enjoyable and fun. And especially, I know everyone loves parkour and I love it. The parkour in every game before the new ones is
Changes around its environment.
but it's deliberate. You know, hay bales are deliberately put in certain spots. Stuff to run up is deliberately placed. In history, I really doubt if you walk down the street you had that many opportunities to parkour.
Yeah, if you look at the world around you now, there is no way you're going to be parkouring everywhere.
Oh.
Like, if you go to London 21st century, there's pigeon spikes everywhere. There's no way you'd even get close to climbing up, like, Nelson's column without the rope launcher. Or without being arrested, mind you. Please don't try it. Please don't get you arrested.
I must.
But, like, London is so vast as well. Like, the scale of buildings, and particularly in Valhalla, the scale of settlements and the distance between, like, say, Winchester and London or Crawley and Tamworth is different. So you don't spend literally hours travelling from place to place.
So then I think it's fair to say that Assassin's Creed will always be a historically science fiction game, and they do a spot on job with history. I'm a big history buff, and I think they do a fantastic job. But you need the gameplay mechanics to make the worlds that much more enjoyable, because if they stuck to history, it'd probably just be boring.
Yeah. And they're also using, in very rare cases, they are using brand new research or things that are breaking misconceptions around in the games. Like, example, Leonardo da Vinci in the Ezio trilogy. Around that time when the games came out, so 2009 to 2011, it was only very rarely in like very early stages of the idea that Leonardo da Vinci could have been queer or gay was being accepted in the historical the historical, I don't want to say nerd world, the professional history world. Like with the scholars and stuff, it was only very early being accepted at that point, and they added it anyway because it was what they thought would be most historically accurate.
And I mean, and I think the one this is why I actually brought this episode up to you, but it's one of the biggest point out in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. They've tried so darn as to stick with historical accuracy, and when you do a lot of research, as I did before this, Vikings are most commonly known to be using axes because swords were for the wealthy, they were passed down. So when people say, well, why can't we do one-handed swords in Assassin's Creed Valhalla?
They're so rare, and they were more ceremonial events than anything. Axes were ones you could use for combat, for chopping down trees, for hunting, arguably, depending on what you were hunting, like bears.
I wouldn't want to hunt a bear.
Well, we've all died to bears in Valhalla more than once.
Yeah. And
Those are beasts.
people do argue in Valhalla then, well, if you can pick up if you can pick up spears, you can pick up shields, why can't you pick up swords? Well, gameplay standpoint, the it would look similar to a standard RPG of Sword and Shield. It's so common in a medieval setting to have Sword and Shield, so gameplay wise, it would have just looked too bog standard having Sword and Shield, and the animations would have looked directly similar, so there's no point. But from a history point of view, well, Vikings would use this one tool axe. If they could find a sword, there's no saying they would have picked it up.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in my episode on Shield Maidens. They probably didn't exist. They are something we've collectively accumulated into a fictional perspective of the Viking period, that Shield Maidens were everywhere, particularly when we now have things like the TV show Vikings on, where we have Lagartha and her Shield Maiden in full view. But the developers mentioned they added them in because they're so commonly associated with the Viking period, even if there is no concrete evidence that they existed or not. They're adding it in because we expect it to be there and we know it's there, and also because rule of cool. I want to be a badass shield maiden. I really do. It's fun.
I think I'm kind of glad they added it in, because there is a lot of new settings showing that some DNA from Vikings were actually female. So
Urca burial, yeah.
So it's really cool that.
Era, I think. I don't know.
I did read something, but I can't remember the name, that won this big famous battle. Everyone argued for ages that it was a male Viking. Turns out it was a female. And now they could have gone, well, you know what? There's no guarantee that Shield Maidens were as popular. There's no guarantee that Shield Maidens did as much as what Eivor does. But because it's history, there's a good chance it happened. So female Eivor being canon as modern is the protagonist is historically accurate, in a sense that you can't disagree that it never wasn't common, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's been historical records of women fighting for centuries, millennia. While it might not have been as commonly accepted as it is now, they still fought, and there were people like female Tommies in World War One. People lied on enlistment forms. Ladies lied on enlistment forms to fight on the front lines, on the Western Front. We have Joan of Arc. We have Jeanne de Clisson. We have, so many goddesses that are associated with battle, like Athena, goddess of battle strategy. There must be some truth to a conception of myths show what people think about their society and their reality in a fictional setting. So if we have these myths now, then surely it's kind of historically accurate to have female combatants in a game. Just because we don't see the records of it doesn't mean they didn't exist. It's not like we can go back and ask them.
And I think that's the biggest thing that works in Assassin's Creed's favour. History is written, and how it's written doesn't have to be the truth. Because there's a famous quote that history is always dictated by the winners. Just because something happened in history by one person doesn't mean that's truly what happened. So Assassin's Creed is allowed the liberty of saying, well, what if it didn't?
Yeah, and there's a big point with historiography, which is the study of historical texts and stuff, that if you go and study history or archaeology or something similar in a degree setting at university, master's, doctorate level, you learn to question who wrote this, what would the biases be, and what are they not telling us.
And
so what they're not telling you can be more influential to what you put in and learn about the society and historical accuracy than what they are.
And technically that works so well for Assassin's Creed, because you can say...
It gives you a lot to play with. Pun not intended.
But it also can have the whole concept of X event happen X way because Templars made it so. And then they have that little bit of wiggle room to say, well, actually, it didn't happen, it happened this way, but it was covered up by the Templars. And that's a great way of mirroring the whole problem with history and gameplay, because you can change the gameplay world of history without changing history itself by asking the what if questions if you don't really know the answer.
Yeah, you fill in blanks with something that makes sense. We've done that anyway. Like, quite a lot about history is, oh, we have our society thinking this, therefore, this historical period may have been like this. If you fill in blanks of stuff that you know or you assume from the end result, like, we know the Templars are currently winning after the purge of 2000. And we know about the Assassins and the Templars, and now we know about the Hidden Ones and the Order of Ancients before the Crusades. Fill in the blanks with what the information you have. Like, rule of cool might apply, but not everyone is going to stick to the same way of living. Like, I live my life completely different to some other people my age. We're not all going to be exactly the same. We're not all going to think the same things or live our same lives. A little bit of variety is fun every now and then.
So then, as I said, we would ask at the end, just quickly, briefly, and you can go first. Should Assassin's Creed cater to more historical accuracy, or keep doing what they're doing with the blend of history and gameplay?
The archaeologist in me really wants to say more historical accuracy, but honestly, this is a game. This is a game series, everybody. I like the game series as it is, with this blending of myth, fiction, and reality, and archaeology and archaeogaming, and that's what makes this franchise so enjoyable. They are teaching you the history, but they're also giving you a fun gaming experience that is world renowned. It is Game of the Year nominated, particularly for AC3 and Odyssey, and it grabs people's attentions. It invites people to learn more about the history. Arguably, Assassin's Creed is the reason I got so deep into history. So, even if something isn't completely 100%, if you give people the threads of this is what it looks like, and if you're presenting it as it's not actually shown, say, oh, you can do a sort of meta thing, knowing that the Templars are in charge in the modern day, saying the Templars are showing it like this, but this is how it actually happened. Make it meta if you're changing things, I think. But yeah, keep with the history and the gameplay mechanics, I think.
And I will agree with you. I think Discovery Tour should be implemented more for 100% historical accuracy, as you all know. But even if it's not a game, a little nerdy fact about me is when I studied GCSE history, I spent probably all of year 11 arguing about the what ifs. People say this happened in history, and I'll say, but what if it was caused by this way or that way? And
that's kind of a good historian.
I think Assassin's
Good
Creed
historians look for those questions.
Exactly, and I think that's what Assassin's Creed does best. The idea of changing the gameplay and adding new gameplay mechanics to legit history, it's kind of fun because they're asking the what if questions for us and giving us a fun dialogue because we'll do it, we'll play it, we'll enjoy it, and then afterwards we'll be like, well, I want to go Google the real history behind it. And then we can then ask our what ifs based on the gameplay what ifs.
Yeah, because we're both lucky enough to have studied history. Not everyone is going to be able to have studied history as the levels that I have or you have, or at least have such an in-depth knowledge of it. And the games are a great way of accessing that. If you make it fun, people are going to be more inclined to, like you said, look it up later.
I will admit, and this is going to probably show how Sorry, you carry on.
No, I'm done. I'm done. Don't
worry. I was going to say, this is going to sound silly, but prior to Origins, I actually had no idea on Ptolemy Egypt. I knew of who Cleopatra was by name in films, but I had no actual knowledge of Ptolemy Egypt, of what happened that time period. And playing Origin.
Case in point, you learned something.
Yeah, I've been playing the heck out.
Like I didn't know who like my historical my historical preference period is Greco-Roman mythology or Victorians to World War One. Like I don't know much about the Renaissance period, so or like Ottomans and Suleiman the Magnificent. So having the Ezio trilogy focus on things like that and learning who Cassini Sforza was and introducing me to Machiavelli. I'm currently reading The Prince at the moment. Um, it opens your opens you to history that you never even considered, and I think that brings up a question that I don't think we have the time for a debate today on where should it head up next. I think you've already covered that, or like you've already thought about that, but there's been a lot of call online for a non-European centric game next. Go for somewhere like there's been leaks about India and China, and frankly, I want to see a Australia New Zealand game.
Ooh.
Because I don't know much about that history and I want to learn, and the games would be a great way of getting that across.
For me, Spanish Inquisition of Aztec. It's in Assassin's Creed Assassin's Creed Lineage. There is mentions of an assassin in the Aztec Mayan era during the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh.
And you cannot tell me a game set in that time with fully fledged tree parkour system like 3 but better would not be cool.
Yeah. And you've also got like the idea of the like you could learn about cultures and like how they live their life, their customs and stuff. And this is not neither of what we said, but I want because in some of the database entries we learned that Julie d'Aubigny, a French noblewoman, was a assassin affiliate. I think she later became an assassin. Her life is insane. If you look up Julie d'Aubigny, you will not believe the amount of stuff she managed to do before she was 20. Like, and we're talking multiple armed duels. We're talking breaking into a convent to break out her girlfriend. Getting chased out of Paris twice, being pardoned by the king. She lived an amazing life, and I want to see that in a game. That is... It's one of those, like, aluminum Christmas trees things where this can't have actually happened. Search it. Oh my god, this actually happened? And we've toned it down from what it actually was like.
I will admit, where Assassin's Creed goes next, I'm happy because my dream time period has already been completed.
Which one was yours?
It was actually the Crusade, because I'm kind of a nerd for admitting this, but I learned about the Crusade through the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno. The actual poem, I didn't play the game, I just read the poem. And also Monty Python's Holy Grail got me interested in the Knights Templar. So I did a lot of studying on the Crusade because of the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, and Monty Python. It's kind of weird to say because they're both opposites, but you know, and then getting an Assassin's Creed game in the Crusade time in Jerusalem.
Not even just an Assassin's Creed game, the first one.
Yeah, so
the one that set the precedent for everything.
So essentially, I'm complete. I got the time frame I wanted. I learned more about the Crusade than I ever did in the Divine Comedy or Monty Python. But
yeah, because I came into this franchise around Syndicate's release. Because I had a mutual friend who's ironically called Connor and is American, said, "Oh, one of the main characters in this game kind of reminds me of you. It's set in the Victorian period, so you'll like it. It's called Assassin's Creed Syndicate." Pre-ordered the game that afternoon after watching like 3 trailers. Because like, you know, it's one of my favourite time periods. I love it. I love Evie. To the extent that he called me Evie for the 2 years that we were doing our A-levels. It was so much fun.
I will admit, the extent of my knowledge about the revolutionary 1800s actually only comes from Charles Dickens. I think it's Charles Dickens. The right.
Yeah, he was one of the big like writers that changed conceptions of like the lower class and stuff, particularly those in like West End, not West, East End London, Whitechapel and stuff,
Yeah,
and bringing notice to the plight of the poor.
and did he write Oliver Twist, or am I getting?
He did.
Yeah,
Yeah. And A Christmas Carol and Bleak House and Hard Times and stuff.
yeah. It was them sort of books that I read that I already knew a bit about. Industrial and Surprising Syndicate came out when I bought the Oliver Twist novel, so it was kind of fun to read Oliver Twist. Place it.
And then meet Dickens.
Yeah, it was kind of like, oh, enjoyed it.
Hey, buddy.
I was like, oh, I know you just read. I just read you, and I just watched the Christmas Carol. Let's go hang out. And then when we're freeing all those child slaves from the factories, I was kind of like, oh, Oliver Twist. We started like an Oliver Twist gang coming. It would have been nice, actually. Just a little urchin just called Oliver Twist.
Mm.
I'm surprised I didn't do that. I'm sorry, guys. This is all we have time for tonight. So hopefully we'll give you a lot to think about between history and gameplay. And the big takeaway from this is Assassin's Creed does a fantastic job of getting new and experienced people into history through a fun medium of gameplay. I think that's about sums up what we've discussed.
I'd say so, yeah.
There is some historical accuracies that I actually am slightly unhappy they didn't add Easter eggs. I now want Edward to go around going, ahar, and I just want a helmet in Valhalla with Viking horns. It's not historically accurate, no, but come on, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Just a little Easter egg. I will happily wear it just for giggles. Just because, But thank you so much for Louise for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And if you guys wanted to appear on the next episode or join in with scripts, please just let me know through Twitter or my email, and anyone can come on and go away. Laptop, I know my battery's low. Perfect timing. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.